we have to address the interesting vibes. We can't ignore the interesting vibes. I think we're at a point where we can't not talk about what you just said, like this facade, like what is going on, what ag tech companies are real and going to deliver value and going to deliver venture returns.
Coming up on The Modern Acre, we're talking what's going on with ag tech this year and what's happening with private equity investing in farmland.
The Modern Acre podcast explores the latest in business, investing, technology, and sustainability in agriculture, and we're your hosts, Tyler and Tim Nuss. If you'd like to dig deeper with The Modern Acre, be sure to check out our membership community, The Modern Acre Co-op. The Modern Acre podcast is presented by Local Line. Local Line is the all-in-one local food sourcing platform for restaurants, grocers, and distributors. Use Local Line to discover and buy from thousands of family farms that sell every kind of product category, including produce, meat, dairy, and more. Whether you're a single location independent grocery store or a nationwide chain, Local Line helps retailers of all sizes build scalable farm-to-fork supply chains. To learn more about how to source local with Local Line, visit their website at www.localline.ca or click the link in our show notes. All right, Tim, good to be back. Fresh edition of Acre Insights. And I'm super excited to talk about the next episode we have, but we'll leave that as a little cliffhanger. But Tim, I think it's about time. We're approaching the end of February, and towards the end of last year, we made a big deal about our book competition. Mm-hmm. You don't read, and I challenged you to read a book a month, and not even. I think we said 10, right? Challenged you to read 10 books and decided we'd make it a little competition. I read 14 books last year. I need to up my game. So basically, we're giving you a 10-book handicap. My target is 20. Your target is 10. And we're going to see who gets closer or exceeds their target this year. So we're going to do a little check-in. Tim, why don't you start? Where are you at? Are you tracking to 10? And what are the books you've been reading?
Thanks, Ty. Yeah, good pulse check here. My goal was to kind of like pace around a book a month, like knowing that like if I get a book a month, I'll be ahead of schedule and like would put me on track for 12. I'm happy to report I'm at 2.5 books right now. Just started book number 3. The first book I started with was called Traction. It's basically about entrepreneurial operating systems. So just kind of a business book, get my mind right to start the year, thinking about what we're doing with the Modern Acre, what we're doing at the farm, about how we manage the business. That was a really good one. And then I got into the fiction world. I'd never really like read a fiction book since probably I was a little kid, and just wanted to do something a little bit different, and actually like blew through that book of just like, it was kind of interesting how quick I read that one, of just like, it's not business related, where we're talking to each other all day, listening to podcasts, consuming a bunch of business content. And it was like nice to have just like this outlet that has no relation to any of that. So read through that book in a couple days. And now I'm back to a business book that you gave me called The Outsiders. It's about unconventional CEOs. So back on the business track, but ahead of pace, Ty.
How does it feel to read?
I feel so much smarter. It actually helps my wind down routine, because like typically we'll just like sit in bed and just kind of like do the Netflix thing, watch a couple shows. So like get a little reading in before, gets me a little sleepy, and then just like watch one show instead of 2 and still have time to read a couple chapters of a book. I just feel a lot smarter, Ty. Thanks for challenging me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And don't leave us, on the edge of our seats. What was the fiction?
The fiction was one that your wife Ruth recommended to my wife. It's like a Colleen Hoover book called Verity. It's just kind of like a thriller type novel. So it was like just kind of outside my wheelhouse, but super interesting. I like watching those movies like Gone Girl and like those kind of movies. So it was like similar to that type of a vibe.
My wife has all of the book recommendations. She's a machine. I pale in comparison to her reading, but no, I like to mix it up as well with fiction and nonfiction. This year I've been only on nonfiction. So I am also pacing to 2 a month. So I'm on track for my goal. I've read 2 and I'm about 75% done with 2 more. I kind of read 2 at once is usually how I do it, just to, if I'm not into one book, I can turn to the other one. And I think that kind of has helped me over the past year. But I read Traction as well. We did that one together, and that was really interesting. And then I read It's a book called Habits of the Household, and think Atomic Habits, but for your home and your family and your faith. And it's basically digging into different habits that you can put into your life to reach your goals spiritually with your family. And I really, really love that one. That was a great one to wake up with and read through that. So I liked a lot. And then now I'm reading 2 books. One is Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Highly recommend. That is, Tim, you got to read that one this year. It's a super easy read, like really bite-size chapters that are easy to get through. They're almost like blog posts is how he actually put the book together, was kind of a accumulation of blog posts. That's really good. And then I'm reading, quite a title, Rubies in the Orchard by Linda Resnick. And that's a little hint and teaser into our next episode. We're going to be doing our next episode of our story series. Our first was with the Climate Corporation. It was our most downloaded episode ever, all about the story of the Climate Corporation and that whole journey. Our next one will be next week on Tuesday, chronicling the story of the wonderful company and Linda and Stuart Resnick. They're billionaires, have the wonderful company as a holding company of a ton of different ag businesses, food businesses. So we're so pumped to get into that. So Tim, as part of our research, which we've been doing over the past 2 months, I read that book as well. I have about a chapter or so to go, but we're recording that soon. So excited to share that with everyone. So if you're not already, subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you don't miss the story series, the story of the wonderful company, coming next week.
Ty reading Rubies in the Orchard was not on my 2024 bingo card. All right, Ty. So I think we should talk about AgTech. It just seems like the marketplace is getting a little bit weird in 2024. We're kind of like a week out from the release of the 2022 Ag Census data, which was kind of interesting. We're going to be chatting about that in upcoming weeks. But it just seems like a lot of kind of like moving parts within AgTech. A lot of people that had been at AgTech companies for a long time are changing roles, shuffling chairs in the industry, and just wanted to kind of chat about like how we're viewing the marketplace.
What is going on with AgTech? This is fascinating. Tim, we have an inside joke that I think the audience needs to know about. And we hosted a private dinner at RFSI last year. And one of the attendees, we were playing pool. Everyone was having a good time, drinks, food, pool, great conversation. And one of our friends, Chris Ramsey, British guy, okay? We're chatting it up with him, getting to know him, and he comes up to Tim and I, and he says, "Guys, really, really appreciate you guys putting this together. It's really interesting vibes." And we're like, "Is that a compliment?" Very interesting vibes. Like, that does not sound like rave reviews. I think he meant it as a compliment, but Tim and I have just never let that go. And so anytime something's kind of a little weird, we're not really sure of the situation, we like to say very interesting vibes. And Tim, AgTech right now is very interesting vibes.
Yeah, really interesting vibes, Ty. Yeah, like what do you think is happening there? Like we just see like people we've had on the podcast that have been in an ag tech company for a long stint, or like now moving on to consulting roles, they're jumping to another ag tech company. Like we've obviously talked about like funding slowing down. It's like harder to raise the next series. So like, is that what's happening here? Is just like companies are getting leaner and they're just kind of being forced out to find other options, or what do you think is happening?
Yeah, I think there's a simple answer and maybe a not so simple answer. The simple answer is, yeah, it's what everyone's going through right now, right? There's the macroeconomic conditions, and I think we're seeing another wave of headwinds and challenges for startups right now. I think we saw a ton last year, a round of layoffs for growth startups of across industries, right? And I think we're seeing that again because, people took a first slice at it of how do we get to profitability? How do we, reduce headcount? All of these, hard conversations of how do we get to profitability, narrow our scope even of our most profitable verticals. And for some companies it worked. For some companies it didn't work at all and they're gone already. And for some companies it's not enough. We talked about over the past few months companies having to look themselves in the mirror and understand like how do we get to a sustainable place as a business. And I think that it's happening again. And I think it's compounding on itself. And we're seeing some of these ad tech companies, Tim, that don't really have a great solution. Like why do farmers need this? And I think that's what companies need to ask themselves is, how is my product essential or so valuable for agriculture, for farming, or solving a problem that farmers need or customers need to use it? And I think the technology, there's a technology aspect of it as well, of certain technology that just hasn't ramped up fast enough. We're seeing it again, like comparing other industries, the autonomous driving space, right? I worked at an autonomous driving startup 5 years ago, and we thought we were a year away from deployment, right? Public deployment of autonomous cars in multiple cities. And now it's 5-6 years later, and we're seeing that just the tech is not there. And I think that's, on a smaller scale happening across different ag tech platforms of these different solutions, these different technologies that are interesting, they're promising, they're venture backed, but to deploy them at scale, to get customers to buy them at the price points that make sense, I think we're seeing a reckoning really. And I think that's driving some of this interesting vibes, this interesting behavior of people that have like been all in on ag tech as their careers and jumping around, going to consultant roles because they've maybe seen problems at their startups that they think they're in a position to fix in others, or maybe because there's just not a ton of roles as well. We're seeing, talking about ag tech roles, this is a problem in regenerative ag. So many people are passionate about regenerative ag and say, I want to work in regenerative ag. There's not roles in regenerative ag. There's like 5, right? Like there's just not a ton of opportunity in these different spaces. And I think ag tech's facing a similar situation where it's super lean teams. The number of companies are dwindling, and people are trying to figure out, hey, what's next? And how do I still play in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely still some outliers, like bootstrapped ag tech companies that are kind of like low key, that aren't making all the news headlines once a week with being the top 10 ag tech product, but are actually creating like useful tools for farmers. Like we leverage a couple companies on the farm that aren't kind of the marquee ag tech players. So I think there's definitely still some room and opportunity in that space. But yeah, it's kind of like interesting, like the whole ecosystem that the ag tech boom has really adopted. There's conferences, it seems like every week, Ty. There's like Vision Conference in Phoenix for ag tech. There's Evoke Ag in Australia happening, like all these ag tech conferences and consultancies. And like when you actually like visit a lot of farms, like these companies like don't have penetration. So like there's this entire like almost like facade industry where it's not a ton of adoption for how big the industry has gotten.
I'm so fascinated by how World AgriTech is going to go this year. Tim and I are going to be there next month. We'd love to see you. If you're going to AgriTech, reach out to us. We're at Tyler and Tim at themodernacre.com. Emails. We'd love to just connect with you, grab a coffee. I'm going to be drinking coffee all day, I imagine. But I'm super fascinated, Tim, not just to talk to people on the ground, but also hear what the panels are talking about, right? Because like we have to address the interesting vibes. We can't ignore the interesting vibes. I think we're at a point where we can't not talk about what you just said, like this facade, like what is going on, what ag tech companies are real and going to deliver value and going to deliver venture returns.
Totally. Yeah, it's going to be super interesting. Definitely email Ty to set up a coffee. Like I want Ty booked for a minimum like 10 coffee meetups on Tuesday during AgriTech.
Yeah, it's going to be a single day, and that's going to be great. Looking forward to it. We'll put a link in the show notes for our code to get a discount for World AgriTech if you haven't signed up already.
Speaking of, Ty, I forgot to book my hotel. Limited options. Hotel rooms are now like $800 a night, so not sure what I'm going to do. Might sleep in my truck. I don't know.
Great. I haven't booked my flight, so we're in similar boats. So we got to figure that out maybe after this call. All right, Tim, we're going to wrap things up. Big news, hot off the presses. This podcast, we're not like responding to stuff in real time. Like we give it a little time to marinate, like see what people are talking about. But this hot off the presses, fascinating, Tim. So Trinitas Farming, just as of yesterday, it was announced, Trinitas Farming LLC, which is backed by private equity firm Trinitas Partners LLC, filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy on Sunday. This is fascinating, Tim. Trinitas Farming is a huge deal in California agriculture and in almond farming. They have 7,800 acres of almond farms, and they're going to have to sell them off to cover their debts. This is crazy, shocking news. Tim, what are your thoughts?
This is crazy, Ty. Like, they've been kind of like the marquee model for investing in almonds. Like, they've been around for quite a long time. They're buying up farmland, running this model of developing almond orchards. And they've been pretty bullish on vertical integration. They've made investments into AgTech companies. They've made investments into vertical integration processing and consumer food brands. They have a farming operation in Maui. So like they're doing a lot. They're headquartered out of Redwood City, which is in the Bay Area, with a farming office in the Central Valley. And like, I've known these guys for probably 4 or 5 years. One of the startups that I worked at early on in AgTech, Trinitas was a customer. They were also an investor, so like work very closely with their team. And so I think the ramifications and implications here are quite real for AgTech as well as ag retailer. Like, this is a massive customer tie, 7,800 acres. Like, think about the amount of inputs they're using, the amount of irrigation services they're using, AgTech. Like, this is a monster business, and all their vendors are going to be impacted by this. And I think going to create some like interesting farmland dynamics in California, like with 7,800 acres of almonds essentially getting liquidated. And we're in this period where like farm revenues are going down, almond pricing is going down. Like, who are going to be the buyers at that price? Like, that's a lot of investment and kind of an uncertain forecast for what's happening with almonds. And we're going to be talking deeper about kind of the forecast and USDA census in future weeks. So we won't dig in super deep there, but I think it has really interesting ramifications.
I mean, it's a fascinating case study because, I think there's a ton of examples in business where you see the cool business that's spending a ton of money and you're like, man, they just have like deep pockets. They get the cool farm trucks. They are investing in the flashy, sexy ag tech. And they're doing the sexy crop at the time, right? When like Trinitas was going big at developing these acres, almonds were on the upswing, right? Like, that's what everyone was doing. We saw it in our local area, right? As everywhere around us, almonds getting planted. Like, it was crazy over the past 5 years. And ultimately, what comes up comes down in commodities. And like, there's a massive oversupply causing almond prices to really tank. And when you go all in on this crop, this permanent crop, you can't adjust. You're all in on this crop, and you're over levered, and you don't have frugal spending habits. Like, it makes a ton of sense. Actually, it's pretty straightforward in my mind, but it's just crazy that they were really viewed as like this leader in the space.
Totally. Yeah. It makes me think about like other similar organizations that are doing a similar game plan, investing in almonds, whether that's like Farmland LP or Gold Leaf. Like, a lot of players are in this space using private equity to invest in farmland and develop permanent plantings. So this is going to definitely create some noise in the marketplace. Yeah,
it'll be fascinating to follow. Tim, this is also a great segue as we wrap up here to our episode next week, the story of the wonderful company. They have a ton of almonds. So that's going to be exciting to dig into because, the wonderful company has had ups and downs on the farming side for sure. And they've experienced ups and downs and droughts. And we're going to get into all that piece of the story. But what's interesting is they are diversified, right? They're not in a single crop. And I think that has helped allow them to be successful, as well as the vertical integration, going direct to consumer, developing a brand. So hopefully that's a little teaser for the great conversation we've got for you next week. So Tim, with that, we're going to wrap up. Thanks for joining us this week for an episode of Acre Insights. Make sure you're subscribed. YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're coming to you next week with the story of the wonderful company.